So then we are back with a modern understanding from the time of the Second Tabernacle service. Is a refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end, per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find then a layer of understanding related with the 61st chapter, where there is the spring feast, autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. And from this understanding, obviously, we find areas of the 11th chapter, also of Daniel, where then the condition of the northern kingdom becomes then greater than the first, speaking of then the Soviet Union. It is very important then establishing a very specific parameter of what's coming then from the northern kingdom versus then the eastern kingdom regarding China. The southern kingdom is yet developing itself, obviously related mostly with raw materials. As we understand also, it is the place of tabernacling. So besides then raw materials, the very importance of Africa is regarding then obviously tabernacling being the first holy city of the time of the restoration period. This understanding is found then in the 61st chapter of Yeshayahu. The 62nd chapter then later relates with Ezekiel the 37th regarding then the sticks of authority. What is the 62nd? The 62nd chapter relates the Ishmaelites, then obviously the desert people, related with this proper layer where you find then Ezekiel the stick of trade and the stick of authority of tabernacling. These then are in conjunction, working together to get these understandings then preparing for the time of the end. As far as then with the specific understanding of the northern kingdom, it is very valid the understanding of the king of Babylon when he was then the head of gold. So let's understand then from the viewpoint of Daniel, related with the second chapter of Daniel, the statue. The gold, then comes the silver, then comes the bronze, and then iron clay. Understandably, when the Roman Empire ended, then it started then iron and clay. Iron and clay then means some kingdoms would be strong, some kingdoms would be weak. Not only this, but then during the time of the restoration period, after 09, then these iron and clay is further refined. Because we have then the understanding of the 1,000 years of the seat, no holy cities, from 1009 to 2009. Those also, when you read the understanding of the Roman Empire, and afterwards you find sections of it where then iron does not mix with clay. So then, some nations would be weak, some nations would be strong. The 11th chapter of Daniel then gives you very clear understanding where then you find a further refinement, where then you find the kingdom of the east, north, and south related, and those are the decision makers, and then the rest of the world lines up with these. So then the northern kingdom, we find then it is given a task of the military movement of the time of the end. There is the leader of the northern kingdom, Mr. Putin, must never be questioned. Let's understand why. Some people say, don't you then make this statement as a dictator? It's not a dictator per se. It is the task. The dictatorship is not a person, it is the task. So then understandably, when you evaluate, for instance, the kingdom of Babylon during the time of the first king, you understand him as a task. You understand him as the head of gold. You understand a person does not admit lies. You find a person, when a person is caught lying, a person is destroyed. It is true. It is the nature of the task. So then when we understand the 11th chapter, we must make a defining understanding of trade, being prepared then for the second stick of the Ishmaelites later. And then you find then a couple of chapters later in the Apocrypha, Dragon and Bel working then this scenario. What does it mean? We find then, other than the dragon in this world, on the Gentile level, the Babylonian system has to have a leader and a leader only. It is found then in the northern kingdom. Africa has tabernacling. East is the dragon. And then the rest lined up and then do the work. So then you can question, for instance, the trade. You can question tabernacling, but you can't question the northern kingdom. It is the nature of the situation where you simply can't question. So then, when we read then the first king of Babylon, you can read from the 62nd chapter, for instance, of Yirmiyahu, when you understand then the Ishmaelites later being given then the stick of the trade, or then recuperating, restoring. So then when we understand then the statue of Daniel, you understand then also a restoration of the authority from then a world's viewpoint, Gentile, where you can't question because of the military involvement. This means, very directly, Israel has no more place in the military. Israel has no more place in trade. Israel must trust what the Messiah has said and be dependent upon those who are going then to provide them with what is required as tabernacling then is concerned. How does it work? When we read then the understanding of Yirmiyahu, the 61st chapter, you find the Gentiles then included in the plan. Not only tabernacling is then restored, but then even the heathen would observe the works of the Creator and would be amazed by His holy works. So then we find the Gentiles not being enslaved, but the Gentiles contributing for the time of the restoration of the holy cities. So then we find Israel then removing itself from the world as far as military, as far as trade, and being restricted only with tabernacling. The first objective of Israel is on the land of Cush. So then Yirmiyahu 1:8 gives you precisely the understanding where tabernacling would be. How do you find it? From the original manuscripts you find the word Yushkni. If you read this in Hebrew, you find it is a cipher word. Because Yirmiyahu was a prophet, he was speaking of the time of the restoration of the holy cities where not even the spring feast was completed. It didn't make any sense during the time of Yirmiyahu. So they did not understand. They did not understand the Messiah would start his own kingdom and these 1,000 years is far gone. But then since the cities are returning, where then the second anointing is then granted. You know, the double portion. The first portion was already given, where we find then the functions. 7 spirits of Elohim, 7 functions. Then we find the second portion, where then Israel then takes care of tabernacling, and then resumes the second services. Then we find Israel then itself being pruned, in quote, so then they would understand the works of the Messiah. So Israel must remove itself from the world of military. They must become quiet, understand their position before the world. And then, not only this, we in the United States, we must retrieve. So then we can rebuild. We must understand Israel is not obedient. We must understand we were given the wrong scripture. We must humble ourselves and then submit during this time of the end for our own benefit, because if we do otherwise, it's coming against us. So then, understandably, if Israel decides to go on its own way, they will have consequences. This means when the orders of the northern kingdom comes out and Israel is found in the wrong place at the wrong time, they're going to be shut down. The reason why this must be done, it's because the head of gold of a person that does not admit lies and cheats must be restored. It is this way or no way. So then we find the dragon absolutely trade. We find China absolutely protected. The objective of Mr. Xi is going around the world making deals. That's his job. Nobody interferes with his work. He has an agenda. There are countries going to China for trade. The market of the world is absolutely in shambles. So then we must understand Mr. Xi has the work of making deals. The northern kingdom must never be questioned. They are related with the protection of those countries doing trade with China. Any person doing trade as far as his kingdom, speaking of leaders of nations, doing trade with China, are then instantly protected by the northern kingdom. So then we understand the Apocrypha when Daniel then explains the dragon and Baal. Those are not bad terms. Those are spiritual understanding. So then the time of restoration must be removed the word confusion. That's why then when the northern kingdom's leader receives lies, it is dealt with instantly. So then the respect is restored. So then the market can remove itself from being deceitful. So then the market can stabilize and people can get jobs. Because it is a very dangerous situation where we are at. And this transitional time requires absolutely a model of each. A model of organization and a model of trade. And then we have the perfect model found on Africa, where then tabernacling is then re-established. However, tabernacling is not for the purposes of control. Tabernacling is not going to say, do this, do that, do the other. The solely purpose of tabernacling is the re-establishment of other holy cities. They have no other function. If any nation desiring more knowledge regarding tabernacling, they are absolutely welcome to go to those cities and ask. But those cities are not going to give orders. It's not their function. That's why then it was given the northern kingdom the absolutely total power, as long as there is the human factor included, meaning then protecting those countries doing trade with China. And then the rest of the world must go out of their way, get out of the way, because it is the restoration of the authority of organization, military organization, where the nations then doing riots and doing anarchy must refrain themselves from. And we, United States, we are included. So then, for instance, Singapore and our ships over there in Singapore, it makes no sense. We are interfering with China's trade. We are inviting trouble for ourselves. We find that then Syria is stabilizing itself. We find then the very wise decision of Mr. Putin of helping then Syria is very wise. So he stabilizes the region, and then obviously Mr. Xi would be the next person of making a link with them, so then they can recuperate the nation. Not only this, but then the Middle East. But in order then for Mr. Chi to do his job, then Israel must get out of the Middle East. They have to be then contained in their own country. So then peace then is established. But then a direct link only with Israel in northern Africa. That's the only link that Israel must have. No other country, no other nation, no other area. That's why then the prophet Yeshayahu mentioned, Yeshayahu 1:8, you find the precise place where Israel must be at, on the land of Cush. That's northern Sudan. At some place in the northern Sudan, a holy city must be rebuilt. Israel has no other place in the earth. After the first city then is closed, and then performing as it should, functioning as it should, then other cities must be around, such as the 7 cities of Asia Minor. Those must return. But they don't control the area. They only establish their cities and do tabernacling. Those nations interested in knowing, they go and they ask. But they are not obligated. So let's then make this absolutely clear. At a very short time in the future, we are going to find then an authority from the Soviet Union going to China. As this person returns in charge of the entire military of China, combining with its own. So then let's be prepared, because then not only these combining of the militaries, we find then the great downloading of the time of the end, thus then starting the new trade of the end. It is very near. And when it does, our country is instantly ruined, because we are not prepared. We don't have then a USDV. We don't have a control of this market. We have only paper money. That's what we have. And we do not have enough gold even to back it up. China is working both ways. They have the banking system and also a virtual system under the same name. We don't understand how they did it, but they did. It would be a combination of the Bitcoin system in Chinese terms and also the yen paper money. They are prepared both ways. That's why then they make so many deals so instantly with so many nations. It's because it's automated, it's in the computer. So then, understandably, then authorities from the Soviet Union are also going to South America, thus then establishing a balance of power. Cuba is the first on the list, obviously, because they were very active during the time of the 60s. So then we find precisely what went on then during the time of the 60s, during the time of the Soviet Union, but this time they must be greater than the first. So then if they were mighty in the past, you can imagine what the Creator has said as far as being greater than the first. And when the Creator speaks, greater means a lot. We may understand greater as double, maybe triple, quadruple. But when the Creator speaks, and then it's worldwide. It is the military power of the world. So let's understand then what it means, the head of gold. Let's understand what it means, the stick of authority of the Ishmaelites. And let's understand what it means, tabernacling. Understandably, tabernacling people can ask. That's why they are there for, but they are not obligated. The dragon, any country can do trade with China. Obviously, they must be filtered at some point because people are encroaching over there in their area. And it's going to cause trouble. The Northern Kingdom never question. Never question. It's not a place and time of asking any questions from the Northern Kingdom. I have the liberty to do whatever they want as far as is within then the human capability related with the trade and protection of the countries doing trade with China. They have the liberty in the air, they have the liberty in land, they have the liberty in the oceans and above the oceans. So then we can position ourselves and then understand where we belong. Because thus far, the United States does not have a belonging place. They're going everywhere. They're going to Australia. Sometimes then we try to go over there in New Zealand. And then we try to go over there in Panama. And those areas are not working. Our nation then, obviously, because we do not have a compensator in the virtual market as Bitcoin, then we find ourselves in trouble. We find these gamblers of the economy earning as much as they can, and our country is being ruined. So then when we read the 11th chapter of Daniel, let's understand the 11th chapter then gives us a refinement of the time of the iron and clay. It is true there was a time where iron and clay, they were some of them strong, some of them weak. Understandably, those they also fit during the time of the 1,000 years of deceit. But then we find ourselves beyond those 1,000 years where it is then refined further. And there is a restoration of authority, restoration of credibility, restoration of loyalty. Those were found in the first king of Babylon. Not making a comparison as far as personality or type, speaking of the task, a task of loyalty and then trustworthy. Those must return. And in the position of the first king, you don't question. The orders are given, it must be done. That's why Israel must retrieve itself from the Middle East. They must remain quiet. The only place where they have then a relationship is with Northern Sudan. It's the only place. From then on, then they established those 7 cities in Asia Minor. But those are then gradual. Israel has no other place in this earth. This is it. Either we understand the plan of the end, or we don't understand the plan of the end. So as then the world then it transitions itself, then we find ourselves during this time of the trade of the end, where then Daniel said, people for a time would go to and fro. No holy cities, and then 1,000 years of deceit. Then we've entered the time of the dragon, after 09. And then there is the refinement or the restoration of the holy cities, but the Gentiles were included. When the Gentiles were included, what are those traits or characteristics found in the first king? We have to understand what it means positive traits or then characteristics of the first king. Those are found in the northern kingdom. Because of selection. We can't question, why then has the Creator selected the northern kingdom? Ask Him. So then we find, already defined 2,500 years ago. There is a established way of this circulation of the flow of events. You have then the dragon in the east doing trade. We find in the kingdom of the south then raw materials and tabernacling. In the northern kingdom, no person can question. So then we can line up ourselves because we find then trade, protection, and you find tabernacling. And the world becomes then virtual as far as the market is concerned. Trade, monetary systems. And then in exchange, then banks, and what we used to know of banking is no longer required. Because it must be placed under the control of the computer. So then these scoundrels gambling with somebody else's money It must end. And the only way of doing it is by having a virtual monetary market or system. There is no way around it. So then the proper layers then of understanding is given you. Very clearly, the 11th chapter gives then a couple of chapters later what it means then the northern kingdom, the second position of the northern kingdom higher than the first. And then not only higher than the first, but the very military of the time of the end. There are other aspects later, but at least we understand there are some traits or characteristics of the first king of Babylon then being restored. Not saying that Mr. Putin is the king of Babylon. That's not the point. The positive characteristics of trustworthy, of being loyal, of being truthful, and absolutely can't admit lies, those are returning. Then you find ethics must never be questioned. You find then the trade of the East. You find nations being linked up. You find then the Eurozone dismantling. You find more deals going on around the world until the entire world is linked up in the same system, so then people can do trade via computer. But then the form of work of the system is similar as when we were at 50s. It's very simple. It's a simple type of work. Only a few people they would be required to do running of computers. So not every person is going to have a diploma and then get a high position job. It's on the contrary. Only a very few selected to do computer maintenance, and then the rest must do the regular labor. There is also another part of these understanding where then there is a combination of trade and military protection, where then both leaders of the East and North, they come up with a strategic way of combining trade and the military positioning. And those no person will know. Only those leaders related with these couple of kingdoms will know for sure the flow. But obviously when you understand the presence of those leaders, then you have an idea what goes on. But no person can speculate. As we understand, came out an article today in the China News, already giving the absolutely total liberty for the submarines of China of then going anywhere in the world international waters, including the Northern Pacific. So it's already giving you indications of then militaries being joined. This means then Cuba becoming then a patrol place. And then at some point in the South Pacific, it's very important that New Zealand being interested in becoming a distribution center. And then we in the U.S., we must retrieve. If we have a sense of God, the Creator, we must retrieve and submit. If we don't submit, if we don't rebuild, then it's coming against us. Because it couldn't be any clearer. The 11th chapter, if you read very cautiously, you find then Daniel describing a long time ago, more than 2,500 years ago. And when you read, you understand as if it was yesterday, yet it is the future, and then recorded in the past. So your mind begins to understand, boy, how come it was 2,500 years ago as it was yesterday regarding the future? Welcome to tabernacling. Then when you understand, when your mind does not make a distinction of what was in the past regarding the future, yet speaking in the present, of the very present time, then you understand tabernacling. There is no time involved with it. So then, since these Chinese submarines can go anywhere in the world, this means that in a very short time, those nations doing trade with China, then obviously they will be protected. But thus far, then, U.S. is being involved with the Singapore, and it's not going to work. If we do this often in the Pacific, then it's going to force the nations doing trade with China, then going through the Northern Kingdom first. So we should think very soberly what we are doing and what we should not be doing, because from now on, what should we not be doing? So lots of topics a person can read, debate, and talk, but then try to understand when it means restoration, have in mind what Daniel said in the 2nd chapter, then the 12th chapter, then you find Ezekiel 37, you find Yeshayahu the 61st and 2nd. So the Messiah said not a layer is going to be left undone. He never said words or never said vowels or any kind of other sign on the holy instructions. He was speaking of layers of understanding. When you layer, for instance, the 61st, the holy cities, you layer then future, the 37th chapter of Daniel, then you understand layers from time and time. From generation and another generation, you find then those layers being combined. This is what the Messiah said. Not a layer is going to be left undone. The 11th chapter gives you the layer of the authority, unquestionably, of the Northern Kingdom. You find people doing trade with China in tabernacling in Africa. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.